This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, everyone. Let's call the Stratford Housing Partnership of March 16th to order at 12:02. Everybody got the meeting minutes a couple of weeks ago, so if there are no changes or comments on that, I'd like to get we should approve those, so if we could get a motion.
Motion to approve minutes of February 16th, February.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comments, concerns? Nope. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Okay, so the next thing on the agenda, we thought it would be helpful to focus first on talking through what we think our priorities and our action should be over the next several months. Last meeting, we talked about many different topics, and we can't focus on all of them at one time, so we have to prioritize. So I spoke with Susmitha, and we kind of came up with these three topics, and then anything else that you think we should talk about. But I don't know, Susmitha, did you want to talk about the first one on the list?
Yeah, sure. Before I give an overview of this, I wanted to we all know that we don't have two key members of the partnership today. One is Mayor and the other one is Liz Sulik, both so invaluable for this discussion. So I mean, in their absence, I don't know if we can vote and rank today, or we would just have a discussion and come to an agreement on what we think are the general priorities amongst ourselves, but then hold off on the vote maybe till next month. I don't know. But I did share some materials with you this morning, and I'm going to go over them briefly. In the last meeting, Harold Watson has asked me to share a one-pager on how many more units we would need to reach that temporary moratorium for 8-30G statute on affordable housing. And I know in my conversation with Jennifer Sheldon, she's asked me also to provide a one-page summary to all the members. Unfortunately, I missed conveying this to Glenn. It was my mistake. I've been so busy that I couldn't get in touch with him in time. So this morning, Glenn and I discussed, and I quickly put together something that I found on the Department of Housing webpage, and then added additional numbers in. So if you look at the affordability sheet, which I'm on my screen here, I couldn't get an exact estimate of housing for 2022, so I pulled together the 2021 estimate. In fact, if you look at the DOH portal, this website that they have here as a link, they have a 2010 estimate, and they're still going off of that. So I don't think that matters too much. It's a couple of housing units here or there, but roughly Stratford has 21,500 housing units. And this is a breakdown of how many are government assisted, how many are tenant rental assistance, how many are CHFA mortgages and USDA mortgages, and how many are deed restricted. The total is 1,303. So right now we have 6% affordable housing stock as of today. I believe when I joined in 2018, it was 6.4. So we went down by 0.4. But again, I also shared another sheet with you, which is on the list of number of apartments that were approved in Stratford, just to see how we're catching up on this. And this is everything since 2016, after the TOD zone was established. We did have one development approved in 2013, which is the 1111 Stratford Avenue. I did include that count in my email to all, just to give you a rough number of how many multifamily we have in Stratford as of today, which is like roughly 720 units. But this over here in this sheet, you can see that 615 apartments were approved since 2017, and out of which 204 were supposed to be affordable units. And now, in order for these to be counted as part of an 8-30 affordability rate, they have to have certificates of occupancy filed with the town clerk. Right now, we only have these as approved. Most of these are not occupied yet, so they do not account for that total count. So if you did a rough math, and let's just assume that we add those 204 to the 1,300 units that we already have as affordable, then we have inched closer to our 10% by another 0.9, like almost near 7%. But if we assume that we are including these additional 615 also in the total count, then we are going down on our affordability count, and we are not even at 6 anymore. We are at 5.8 or 5.7. So this gives us a lot to think. In the statute, there is something called housing unit equivalency points, which is like calculated at 2% of total housing. And if we achieve those housing equivalent points, we can become eligible to avail a temporary moratorium on our 8-30G statute requirement. So that calculation was shown in the previous sheet that I shared with you, and it looks like we would need 433 housing equivalent points.
What is the number?
433. I can share my screen back again with this sheet so I can show you. That's this number here, 433. Now, there are ways we can achieve this. Like we discussed last time, we can start with Stony Brook, start our discussions there. And that is what is on our on the top of our agenda today, which is like, shall we initiate a discussion with Stony Brook, or create a plan to initiate discussions like Beth has suggested in the last meeting. I also shared with you an example of Fairfield's moratorium tracking sheet. And I know Glenn would have had a lot of role in that too, because Glenn prepared their affordable housing plan, and I think he's being an advisor to them on their affordable housing committee. So I would like Glenn speak on what his role was, if any, on that moratorium sheet and how they were able to achieve that moratorium.
Yeah, so I think the situation in Fairfield is that they have received quite a number of 830G applications. I think that at one point in time, I think Mark Barnhart, the community development director there, had done some calculations. They may have received the most 830G applications of any municipality in the state. And part of this has to do with the fact that market values in Fairfield are high enough that if a developer takes the 830G route, and even though 30% of the units are restricted to households at 60 and 80% of area median income, they are able to achieve high enough rents on the 70% of the units at market rate to make those developments work. So the part of the challenge that they've had in Fairfield is that they're getting these applications, not always in the locations that they would like to have them, but to look at moving in that direction. So they've been trying, as Smitha indicated, to track the units, which ones have been approved but not yet built, which ones are under construction, which ones have COs been received on, to try to develop this out. They always feel like they're close to a moratorium, but not quite there yet. So that's the direction that they're moving in. I think just as a quick, this is almost a footnote, if you will, to the conversation, but people should be aware that starting in May, the 2020 census results are due to be released for Connecticut. That will now become the new denominator in the calculation. So Smith's estimate from the ACS is pretty close to what the 2020 census results will be. But also when the state calculates this ratio for Stratford today, they're basing their calculations on the percentage on 21,100 units rather than the 21,650 or so units, which we're likely to have. So in other words, our percentage of affordable units is going to go down a little bit because they base the calculations on the last census housing count. So be aware of the percentages, but also they're going to change over time based on that new census information. So hopefully that's helpful.
So, Glenn, that was our first one, the overview of the housing moratorium. For the record, I want to state that we are now joined by Mayor Hoydick and Liz Sulik also. So we do have everyone in attendance, except one person, I think, Chris, in order to take any vote if you would like to. The second one is accessory dwelling unit regulation development. This was also.
Before we go on, can I just ask a couple of questions about what was just presented, please?
Sure.
Glenn, you said that can you explain? I thought the 21,675 units was from the 2010 census.
And not quite, Beth. I think the situation is right now, according to the state calculations, that's, let me back up or get my paperwork here.
Well, Glenn, if I may interrupt, I think that's an estimate from 2021. An estimate.
If I may, I think your estimate on your material you presented today was 21,675, which is the estimate for the American Community Survey. And that's a 5-year estimate leading up to 2021. So it's an estimate. It has a margin of error around it. Last August, Data Haven, which is a statistical collection group in Connecticut, was able to get into the census database based on number of residents in 2020 and number of housing units in 2020. And the information for Stratford that they released was 21,643. So that would be the 2020 census information that we expect to see in May. There's no margin of error around that if Data Haven did their math correctly. So that's what the calculations would then be based on now, all the way through to when the 2030 census results are released. So we're going to take a little bit of a step back because of the math, but then I think, as Smith indicated, if there's 204 affordable units in the pipeline, that's significant for us. There's two things that could be goals for the town on this, one of which is to become exempt from 830G. And being exempt means that we have 10% of Stratford's housing stock meeting the state guidelines. And at this point in time, based on the new math here, the most recently released state information indicates that Stratford has 1,326 units meeting state criteria. It's just a little bit, it's another 23 units from what Susmitha had. But this is the information that was just released. And the biggest change is in the CHFA mortgages and tenant rental assistance certificates, which we can't get from ACS. So that's updated regularly.
I'm sorry, what was the number?
Which one would you like?
The 1,300, what was it?
1,326 units is what the state released in February as Stratford's affordable housing count. as the numbers, if you're interested, or just for the recording, is 524 assisted housing units, 425 rental assistance certificates, 344 CHFA mortgages, and 33 deed restricted units for a grand total of 1,326. And according to the state's math, that gives us 6.3% as being our affordability rate. I did some quick math here before we got on the call, and based on the state's number that we have 1,326 units, based on the preliminary census number of 21,643, that would mean 10% would be 2,165 units. And the difference between those is 839 units are needed for Stratford to become exempt from 830G. And as Susmitha indicated from her numbers, we already have 204 units on the pipeline. So that's significant. When those units come online, we're going to be, at least a quarter of our way through to the number of units that we would need to become exempt. And then the other way is the moratorium, a 4-year moratorium based on the housing unit equivalent points. And those are the two areas that Stratford may wish to consider.
But Glenn, we should also not forget that we have not accounted those 614 units. I don't know if those are counted in the total housing, because the estimate that the state is going by is from 2010 on their sheet.
Right, but the 2020 number will be 21,643. So the good news for us is that number is going to be fixed for us through to 2030 or 2031 or 2032, somewhere in that range. So as long as we get to 2,165 deed restricted units, sometimes in the next 10 years, we're going to be exempt from the provisions of the Act. I see that Mayor has her hand up. Mayor?
I do. Thank you, Glenn. So our housing census is going to increase with the houses that the zoning commission has already approved.
Mhm.
And I just testified, actually, written testimony yesterday against the Desegregate Connecticut TOD bill, explaining that TOD is working in Stratford, that our land use boards have been working concurrently, and we have over 400 units in this area that are working. So when we add those 400 units to our census, it's going to make our percentage, our ratio go lower. And that's evaluated every year. Is that correct? Am I understanding that?
Yes and no, Mayor. I think the issue is that the number of units that we have produced in Stratford will update every year based on the Department of Housing issuing their affordable housing appeals list. But the math is based on the most recent census. So we had a fixed number between 2010, we'll say, and 2020. And now we have a new fixed number between 2020 and 2030. So we end up with this sort of blip at the end of every decade when the new census results are revealed. So again, if Data Haven's numbers are correct, 2165 will be our baseline going forward of the number of units to be exempt.
I don't know how to put my hand up here using this platform. Jen?
Yep, go ahead, Beth. Sorry.
Oh, okay, thank you. So it looks like, because I'm also developing a little spreadsheet here, it looks like the number needed is 634, right?
That would be correct. That's just so that everybody catches up to Beth on this. If our requirement is 2165, we have on the most recent state report 1326. The difference is 839 units. The units which Susmitha has documented in the pipeline is 204. which means we have an outstanding need for 635. I think that was the number you indicated,
Yeah,
correct, Beth?
they're rounding up on
Yep.
one part, which they
Yep.
shouldn't be. So I get 634, it should be rounded down. But regardless, we would need to have 6,000 units built in order to have, if 10% of the units were deemed affordable, we would need to have 6,000 new units built, which is, that would be adding about a third of what Stratford's current housing is to, it would just be an absurd amount of housing. And just to point out, none of this includes the naturally occurring affordable housing that Stratford has. And I think that will lead to our next discussion.
Yeah, I think that's correct, Beth. I think as I look at the information Susmitha put together, and it's very helpful. Thank you, Susmitha. In the TOD district, we have 204 affordable units out of 615 apartments. So that's roughly 30% of those units. So we need 1,800 units, if you will, if we were able to maintain the same category, or I think is the item on the agenda here, if the existing units at Stony Brook were able to be converted and considered as meeting the state guidelines, that would dramatically change the mathematics that go into this calculation.
Yes.
I think, if I may, I think this is something that the Affordable Housing Partnership talked about as part of preparing the Affordable Housing Plan, is the opportunity for Stony Brook. I think it could be low hanging. I'm sorry, what did I say?
Affordable Housing Partnership. It's a housing partnership.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank
Sorry,
you.
sorry.
Thank you. I use the term very frequently, so I just fell into it. I apologize. But I think the idea for us to consider would be to perhaps initiate conversations with Stony Brook in terms of areas where we can help address each other's desires. And I think for the municipality, it might be a deed restriction for units which are already naturally occurring affordable housing in many respects. And this could become a situation that if there are capital needs that they may have, that there might be a monetary transaction that occurs, which they deed land to the town, or some other way that the units become perpetually affordable, or some other situations. I have no clue the circumstances that could arise, but I think if we have so many units of naturally occurring affordable housing that are a whisper away from meeting the state guidelines, that might be worthwhile at least starting discussions to see if there's any common ground. There may not be, but it's untilled ground at this point in time, and that might be something we might want to consider.
And so, Smitha, if you can make contact with their board and find out who they are, I think you and I and Joe Gresko has offered to do this, and Kevin Kelly, we can approach them collectively and meet with them.
Okay, I will.
Thank you.
Can you remind us of how many units there are there?
Don't know off the top of my head.
Over 900 units there.
So it's solid. That would solve our problem, one and done.
Yeah.
And I think the best part is that there are units already on the ground. In other words, we don't have to build hundreds or thousands of more units. There's just, and we may be able to improve the condition of those units and their utility in the future. So in many, it could be what they call a win-win-win, or something else like that.
And Senator Kelly offered that suggestion to us, saying the town could invest or grant money to the Stony Brook Co-op for improvements, whether it's roofs or pathways or heating development. Love to see energy efficiency. Personally, that would be my thing. But if we did something like that, and they were willing to accept that grant and then deed restrict some or all of their units, as long as they understand that it's not going to lessen the value of their units. I think that's kind of what they think initially when I had my first conversation a long time ago. They thought, well, it devalues, it stigmatized. There's all kinds of things we could talk about, but
Yeah.
I think it would be a great, at least to have a conversation with them.
Mayor, I'm also aware of a situation in other municipalities where the Department of Housing has been providing grant funding for energy improvements for these types of projects. And so there could be, I don't want to say it's free money. I mean, anytime there's public funds that get devoted, but the energy efficiency could make this really a signature project, an example for other communities around the state. We could perhaps, wrap in the housing authority units in this type of scenario too, so it becomes just sustainability and energy efficiency, solar on the rooftops. There's a lot of different ways that this could pan out, but I think initiating the conversation is something I think is a great first step.
I just want to point out my experience on council. When Stony Brook came to us for CDBG monies, there was a concern that it being a totally private entity and them asking for us to essentially subsidize improvements to the entity using those public funds, very limited public funds, that there was a mismatch there. And so that could, I mean, it's pointing out that there would no longer be that mismatch, because then there is a public interest in it being affordable. That might also be a carrot to them.
That's a good point, Beth. Is Tara on this meeting? Because Tara should be on this meeting. She couldn't attend. Aileen?
Let me see. She usually is. She's outside my office. Let me check and see if she can come in.
Yeah, I've asked her to be ad hoc on this meeting.
Okay.
Because part of the reason is through CDBG funding, and there's an email, you guys, and I just didn't get a chance to read through it and send it out, but there's some grant money available for housing through CDBG, and I thought that maybe the next meeting we might be interested in pursuing that. But anyway, sorry, Sismitha.
I just saw that she replied no to the meeting. Maybe she has something and she couldn't attend.
I just texted her to see if she's outside my office.
Mhm.
Yeah, she needs to be part of this conversation with all of this, since she is the CBGG administrator.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm sharing the agenda again.
Sorry to interrupt. I've got Tara here. I'm here.
Welcome. Smitha, your camera turned off? I don't know if you can still hear us, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Whenever I share, it's getting turned off.
Okay, just wanted to make sure we didn't lose you. Okay, so is there anything else we want to talk about now that Tara is here?
Yeah, I'd like her to talk, and sorry to spring this on you, Tara, but there is CDBG housing grant money for affordable housing and projects, and I didn't get a chance to really research it, so I wondered if you knew anything about it.
So the affordable housing aspect of CDBG would be under home, the home program. So it all is under the umbrella of CDBG, and there's ESG, HOPWA, and home. So home would be the program that helps with the affordable housing. We don't get that funding here in the town of Stratford based off of our census for the affordable housing money per se. We can use CDBG funding that we get to acquire certain properties for acquisition. And depending on what you're doing with the property, is it going to be a public housing unit? Is it going to be something like that? But it has to be for low income use within the town. But as far as like a larger dwelling and actually developing affordable housing, that would fall under the home umbrella.
So could CDBG funds be used to incentivize putting a deed restriction on housing units so they become deemed affordable?
There is some language that I'd have to pull it up in the HUD regs, but yes, that something like that can be done. I just need to look at the exact guidelines because I haven't done that in quite some time, but it's not impossible.
Right.
I think that's something that we want Tara to do, don't you think?
Yes.
All right, so I'll look into for you said for deed restricting.
Here.
Yes, to incentivize it.
Incentivize. Yep.
Even the home loan program that you shared with us in February too. It's just another asset through CHAPA that we can, another opportunity that we can make available for residents.
Correct.
Since our fearless leader there, Miss Jen, started off with a CHAPA loan. Towards home ownership. It's a great story.
It is. I wish I had the same mortgage rate now, actually, but
I think we all might. I think if it was possible for us to, for our next meeting, which is roughly a month out, to get a sense of I think we have to be delicate here because we're dealing with a public entity where we have to share our minutes and all of the other stuff, but to get a sense of the conversation with Stony Brook and where there might be areas of common interest, and then what sort of CDBG and other home and other programs might be available. And now we can start to try to connect the dots and figure out how we can accomplish mutual interest. I think that having a synopsis for next meeting would be great.
So that will be my goal for next month. I will have a full report back to everyone as to what we can and can't do, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and if there's any other opportunities, Tara, that you may either learn about or familiar with, we may be thinking CDBG as being the avenue, but you may say, no, there's other avenues too. So if there's other things that may be available, just we're all learning as we go along here. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll look at all the different avenues. And just so you know, as far as the CDBG funding goes, that's always allocated based off of a percentage and the census. So unfortunately, we can't really request those type of funds at the town unless our census calls for it and our numbers do. But I'm going to do a little deep dive and look and see what other opportunities we would have with the CDBG funding and then outside of the CDBG funding.
Yep.
I got you.
Thanks, Tara.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, hey, Glenn, this is Desmond. Quick question. I think a year ago, 2 years ago, when we were talking about our strategies and we discussed what I think we primed on this Stony Brook or large entities. We also talked about some of the naturally occurring, potentially affordable housing with, onesie, twosie homeowners, right? Folks that have had, property for 30 years and they have a tenant that's been there for 15 years, is paying $1,100 for a 3-bedroom. Like, are those opportunities that we, I know Stony Brook is probably going to offer the best bang for the buck in terms of volume, but there might be a lot of those kind of units that we can maybe explore.
No, I think that's a good point, Desmond. I mean, I think that Stony Brook, there may be greater efficiencies, greater bang for the buck in terms of a consolidated deployment, let's say, of solar collectors or drainage improvements or other things like that might provide a fast track, if you will, towards a moratorium or an exemption. But I think the same principles, our goal might be the accomplishment of deed restrictions. And if a naturally occurring affordable housing unit is already selling at the price and all it's missing is a deed restriction, the same opportunities might exist. So I think that we should probably add that to the agenda to keep on our radar screen, Desmond. That's a great idea. But I think step one might be to see if there's any way that we can road test this with Stony Brook to figure out what the situation is. I also recall a program for a municipality in Massachusetts that's somewhat similar to this. So I'm going to go dig that out and I'll share it with Susmitha. And we may want to share that with the group as well and say, look, this is what another town has been doing as a way to sort of convert naturally occurring units to deed restricted. And that might at least get us started on what our program or policy might be.
Yeah, agree. Thanks. Yeah, maybe
Thank
like,
you.
you know.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on the 8-30G? Okay.
If I could just make one comment, there was
Yes,
talk
please.
about 10%. We have tried to push it to 20% wherever we can, but pushing it 10 to 20 to 30 makes a huge difference in our numbers. If we could have any help in doing that under zoning.
You mean in a new development or? Okay.
Yes. Glenn, you probably know this better than I do. It's my understanding that town does have some say in percentages of affordable within a 830G.
I would say not the way that you have described it, I think, Harold. So an 830G is a very specific construct under state law that says a developer can propose a development which does not have to comply with local zoning, provided their development provides at least 30% of the units being deed restricted at 60% or 80% of area median income.
But that's the key number, 30%.
That is that requirement, and they don't have to listen to what the commission has to say. They propose it and flip the burden of proof.
But
The
if
other
we
situation that,
insist on 30, that will change our numbers.
so many communities around the state are grappling with this situation today. Many communities are saying, well, any housing development in the future, if it does not provide at least 10% affordable housing, then we're falling behind as a community and our percentage will go down. So they are adopting what is phrased as an inclusionary zoning requirement. And the inclusion is at least 10% of the units. And some towns are going to 12, 15, 18, and 20% in terms of a set aside requirement. I think it's important for us all to recognize and realize that the creation of housing units is expensive. And so when we do this, we change the economics of development, and every town based on its market has a sweet spot. I can't tell you what Stratford's sweet spot is, but I think it's an area that needs to be considered. And if I'm a developer and you're going to impose a standard or requirement on me of, let's say, 20 or 25%, well, then, you know what, I'm going to go to 30% and just tell you how many units I'm creating rather than asking you. So I think finding the right number here, I think Darien, I think, was at 15%. I think South Windsor just adopted a requirement, I think it was 12. I think Mansfield, out where Yukon is, adopted a requirement. And communities around the state are now implementing their affordable housing plans and addressing this issue. So I think it is fertile ground for Stratford to consider.
Thank you.
Okay. Good point, Harold. Okay, next on the list, accessory dwelling unit. Susmitha, did you want to talk about this?
Sure. I do know, like just yesterday, I came to know that Jay put out this RFQ for zoning regs rewrite, and he received some interest from 3 consulting firms. So I don't know if you would want to deal with this right away instead of having to wait a whole year. which is, or 2 years, which is when the zoning regs will be updated. Because, you know, this is something that every municipality has been considering and reviewing and making their own tweaks on the state mandated language and adopting, so that, you know, they provide adequate opportunities for aging seniors and young residents who want to still remain in the town and take a train to New York or Hartford. So I don't know, I mean, which way you would want to go. It's another question to this group. Do you want to wait till the, you know, Stratford zoning regs are holistically reviewed and rewritten, or do you want to take this up as a priority and move forward with, you know, a regulation that works for right now in the meantime?
Could I make a comment
Mhm.
based on, to add to Susmitha? Zoning has been dealing with the ADU regulations. We've now, I think we now have scheduled our third meeting discussing it. Our goal is to rewrite a draft that we can send to both this committee and to planning to get your input on it. There are certain areas that we feel comfortable in terms of rewriting regulations, but we actually feel like we need a more sophisticated contribution to it in terms of some of the choices. So we're hoping that we will have something to bring to this committee, I think within the next month. The last I spoke with Jay about it, I do know that we're hiring a consultant to work specifically on this.
The regulations now are that if somebody wants to build an accessory dwelling unit, they would have to come to zoning and get an exception.
They'd have to go to BZA to get an exemption, and then it would have to come to us.
And what's wrong with that process?
It's just cumbersome. The burden falls on the individual homeowner in a way that it's not consistent. This will cover specifics for different zonings and all of that. It will also create requirements, including dealing with the grandfathered land issues that right now all have to be approached on an individual basis.
Would the neighbors ever be notified
In both
and have an and sorry, let me ask my question, and have an opportunity to oppose any or have input into any decision, or is this just going to be blanket?
No,
your neighbors building a.
Currently, there is requirement for public hearings, and there will be requirements for public hearings in any of the revisions that we make. It's a neighborhood issue.
But the public hearing would be for each individual. So if my neighbor wants to build an accessory dwelling unit because they're elderly now, I don't know who the next neighbors will be, but I would be notified, and I would have an opportunity to oppose that if it's something I disagreed with.
Yes.
So what zoning is thinking about, would there still be that individual notification?
Yes, there still would be that requirement for cards of all property owners and all of that. Yes.
Then what would change?
We would actually be laying down more complete ideas of what makes it an accessory dwelling unit. It also would get into, this is where we need this committee's help, it would also get into the affordability issue that theoretically, could this property become an affordable unit, or the accessory unit become an affordable accessory unit?
Can I just interrupt 1 second? So the existing accessory dwelling unit regulation requires an attached connection to the primary structure, and it has to be less than 800 square feet, and it has to be owner occupied, and it would require a property owner to submit an affidavit on an annual basis proving his residency, that he's still living there. And it is done it is approved through an administrative review by the zoning commission. So there are multiple steps here. What other communities are doing is they're allowing detached also, but they're still keeping the owner occupancy requirement, and they're eliminating the administrative review part. Some communities are like, maybe it will be as of right, as long as they meet the standards. The size requirements also, like, many communities are looking up until 1,000 square feet. So I just read an article about New Haven that adopted ADU almost a year and a half ago, ADU reg, and it seems not a single ADU was built after the regulation revised and adopted in the past 1.5 years, which is because of the owner occupancy requirement. And New Haven is largely renter occupied. But if you remove that requirement, the Board of Alders are concerned that it will turn it into a real estate nightmare because all the investors will now be flocking and buying properties and creating these ADUs and renting them out. If you look at Milford, they kept the owner occupancy requirement too, but they allow detached. And I think, I'm not sure if it's as of right or not. I have to check. But, there are subtle changes. So you can look at comparative examples and, prepare your own regulation accordingly. But at the very least, the affidavit is something, that most communities are requiring still to come back every year. Westport eliminated that. Mm-hmm.
And we are very mindful of what Susmitha had just spoken about on zoning. One of the things that we're talking about is 51% ownership in either of the dwellings has to be the person on record. So essentially, you're still requiring an owner-occupied property.
So you want it to come to this committee after zoning has drafted what they want to do?
Yes, we just want to bring it to you and have you add your input into it.
So you weren't actually asking for input now?
Not yet.
Fine. Yeah. I guess that's better than not being asked for input.
Agreed, Beth. And I think that might be a good level for us to be involved in at this point, to take on, doing something like that ourselves, probably a big undertaking. So I think it's great that zoning is already starting that, and we can have our input into what's already being worked on, and we don't have to carve too much time out of our, workload, right, to address that. So are we all comfortable with that approach?
I'll say I am, but
I know you are, Harold.
I'm not comfortable with ADUs. I'm not comfortable with separate ADUs, detached. But if what you're asking is if we want to have input or not have input, of course, I would like this committee to have input.
And Beth, just so you feel a little reassured, in our discussion so far, we are respectful of existing property lines and setbacks. So you're not going to see a lot of standalone buildings unless you're on very large properties.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm asking, Beth, is, we're looking at what our priorities should be over the next 6 months, and I think accessory dwelling, obviously a hot topic for us, but is it something we want to dedicate chunks of meeting agendas to, or do we just want to be involved at the level of providing input to, the document Harold and team are already working on?
I would be happy for the latter.
Okay.
And Jenna,
And it sounds like oh, I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead, Bethel.
No, it sounds like the document won't be available for quite a while, not even in the next 6 months.
But this still has to go to the mayor and also town council. So it's not like what we're doing is going to be the end all. And it will also be part of the larger rewrite of zoning regulations.
But it would go to us before it goes to town council,
Yes,
and that would be around when?
depends on when we get it done. We're just starting that right now.
But you think
Very well.
in the next, we're talking few months, not next
Yes,
year?
realistically, yes, 2 months.
So Jen, on that same vein, which is the next item on the agenda, and I know we have 4 minutes or whatever, but the fair rent, we are required, because we have over 25,000 people in town, to have a fair rent housing commission and set an ordinance for that, and that has to be in place by July 1st. So we took templates from, or we copied from other towns and put one together. And as you can see, when you read the document, it actually says West Hartford in there, because that's where a majority of this came from, because obviously we didn't type it, really do wordsmith this very well. But if we, as a housing partnership, can look at this and either get feedback from others that that have fair rent commissions, and just maybe we could talk about it next month at our meeting. So the ordinance committee will take this up. I've asked them to consider what the housing partnership has to say before they send it for final approval to the council. So it's kind of the same process, a little faster albeit, but same process that we would do with accessory dwelling units.
Okay, yeah, I think if everybody could review this, I believe I emailed it out to everybody this morning. And then Susmitha will put it first on the agenda for next month. We can get any input if that works, Laura, unless you need it before the next meeting.
If somebody has input, and I can, remember, we don't have to submit it as the housing partnership. I can submit it as the housing partnership commission members, different members are advocating this. It's going to take more than one turn around the ordinance committee to refer this back. And if they do it by the June meeting, then we're good. So I think we have a little bit of time, but this process was probably the simplest form, ordinance that I found. And I thought that was a good start anyway.
Yep. Okay, great. So we can, if anybody has feedback, let's submit that as soon as we have it, but we can talk about it in next month's meeting just to close the loop on that.
Great. And thanks to Smitha for changing town of, or city of West Hartford to town of Stratford.
Yeah. Well, I do that all the time too.
What happens? Okay, so we are approaching the end of our meeting. So I think, we didn't talk about any issues other than the 3 that were listed out here. So, it sounds like we're moving ahead actually in some shape or form on all 3 of these. If we could maybe at the next meeting talk about any other topics you think we should be focused on. Otherwise, I do think these 3 will keep us, relatively busy. And we can, unless Susmitha, you have anything critical on the Plan Stratford update, we can punt that to next month.
Next month, definitely, I would need more time because that will be the last review meeting of the draft. And I'm working with Rory right now, reviewing her draft language. At some point, I would want to sit down with the staff here first and fine tune this language before we present it to the larger groups. But maybe next month, I will bring a close to final draft language for everyone to see. And Glenn has had a lot of input on that because he's also consulting with that group, sub-consulting with the group. So we had a nice transition from the housing plan to the POCD.
Great. Okay, anything else anyone wanted to discuss today? Okay, do we need a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Harold, second. Laura? Okay, great. We are adjourned 12:57 according to my watch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Great day. Thanks.
St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
See us.